So, since the Great Hybrid War is coming to a close, I decided why not make a video that talks about how to make a hybrid to defeat the Indominus 2.0. And thanks to this guy for this video idea. This video over here, the link in the description, you can check it out if you want to. Anyways, enjoy. So, the first thing to keep in mind, you gotta come up with a strategy to defeat the Indominus 2.0. Like, what sort of strategy are you going to use? And then you gotta choose a base genome based on your strategy. For example, do you want a bone-crushing bite and then add a bunch of contributors later on to enhance the bone-crushing bite ability, or supplement the bone-crushing bite ability, then use something like a T-Rex? If you want your hybrid to be a good grappler, then you might want to consider using something like a Spinosaurus as the base, and add some genetic contributors to increase the potency of the grappling. If you want some agility while also wanting to gore your opponent, then use something like a Ceratopsian. If you want an herbivorous animal that has a good balance in terms of attack and defense, then consider a Proboscidean. But beware that mammals don't really have great heat regulation. If you want to go all in on the size and proportions, then consider a Sauropod. If you want a balance in speed and mass and all that to try and crush the Indominus 2.0 as well, you can use something like a Hadrosaur. If you want to get into the Hall of Shame, then use human DNA. Now, here's the second step. Think of your offense. Like, for example, how do you use a T-Rex bite without compromising on its own jaws? Like, for example, Goji Center used Shrew to cover the T-Rex teeth in iron, as well as making it venomous, enhancing the Indominus biting capabilities. And as well as that, the Shrew also has thrashing jaw motion, which enhances the bite capabilities even further. Some people also chose to use hippos, which work very well. With a grappler like a Spinosaur, you can consider using ape arms to enhance its grappling capabilities and make it be able to use tools. With a Ceratopsian, you gotta make sure that your horn is long enough to be able to gore on the Indominus 2.0, while also not too long to be able to get manipulated easily. In Dangerville's case, it's going to have to rely on Minecraft. Now let's talk about the arguably more important part. Defense. Does your hybrid have enough protection to withstand the Indominus's gashes? When it comes to heavy armor, for example, a lot of people wanted to go all in and decide to choose Borealopelta, probably because the Ultimasaurus Imperatrix also used Borealopelta. Be aware that armor that is too heavy, it might compromise on the mobility of the creature, which we're going to get to later on. So you might want to opt for lighter armor, like the Skeletosaurus, for example, as well as something like the Arapaima and the Dwarf Croc, which will not compromise as much in terms of mobility, at the cost of a reduction of protection from Indominus 2.0 slashing and biting attacks. Some people also choose to put Stegosaur plates onto the back of their creature to try and prevent the Indominus 2.0 from properly mounting the creature. However, you also gotta be aware of the armor and the selection of where you're going to put the armor. Otherwise, your creature's mobility would be compromised even more than it should be. Thick skin and thick hide are optimal for protection. You might also want to use loose skin, so that your creature's mobility could also be increased. Of course, it's kind of mandatory, but you also gotta conjure up something that gives your creature Shrew Venom immunity or resistance. Obviously, the Northern Short-tailed Shrew is immune to its own venom, so you might want to incorporate the Northern Short-tailed Shrew into your hybrid, or at least its enzymes. You might also want to consider something like a mole, a weasel, or even something like a fox. If you feel like your hybrid isn't really congruent enough from either one of these, then consider the wild boar. However, the wild boar will only provide resistance, not immunity. Okay, so now with those out of the way, let's get on to the questions of your hybrid. The first one being, Is your hybrid smart enough? Unless your hybrid is a sauropod, in which intelligence isn't really needed, you're going to have to think of a way to make your hybrid smart, or at least have decent enough problem-solving skills. It shouldn't be very hard to incorporate some form of good intelligence to your hybrid. For example, you can use something like a bonobo, you can use something like a hadrosaur, you can even use something like a T-Rex, or whatever, something else, as these animals generally have adequate enough problem-solving skills. This is also exactly why I did not bother contributing the Skeletosaurus to the brain, or the brain of any other ankylosaur for that matter, because that might compromise on the intelligence of the hybrid and it might get outsmarted. Now, the second question you might want to ask yourself is your hybrid massive enough? Unless if you're something like Maddie, if your hybrid is not massive enough, your hybrid is not likely to win one-on-one versus the Indominus. You're going to need to add some mass to your hybrid, although not too much, otherwise it's going to have a lot more issues in terms of mobility and all that. More mass doesn't necessarily mean better. Your hybrid also has to be appropriately proportioned, lest you end up in the Hall of Shame. The next question is your hybrid mobile enough? Which basically means, is your hybrid fast enough and is your hybrid more agile enough? And if you think your hybrid is not agile enough or not speedy enough or a combination of both, are its size and other stuff enough to compensate for those shortcomings? For example, if you're using a sauropod build which lacks both speed and agility and intelligence and all that, is its sheer mass as well as genetic contributors enough to overcome those shortcomings? If you're using a large hadrosaur like the Edmontosaurus and Shantungosaurus, is its speed and power enough to overcome its lacking agility? If it's something like a T-Rex, then is its agility and sheer bite force enough to overcome its lacking speed? I could go on, but I don't want to waste y'all's time. So, now, arguably the most important part, is your hybrid congruent enough? Are there any unnecessary contributors that can be removed to increase the congruity of your creature? Basically, congruity means the less contributors that share more characteristics, the more the hybrid is going to function. Take this hybrid for example. While 30 tons is justified because of the blue whale, bro should have used something like a sauropod to increase the congruity of the creature. A sauropod has foot padding while a blue whale does not. A sauropod uses all 4 of its limbs to walk, while a blue whale does not even have 4 limbs. This in turn would benefit the congruity of what seems to be a gigantic hadrosaur. In terms of the making of my hybrid, for example, I heavily disciplined myself to keep into the congruity of the creature. 6 of my creature's genetic contributors eat plants mostly. 7 out of 7 contributors have faced predators in their lifetime. 6 out of 7 contributors are either quadrupeds or facultative bipeds. Again, 6 out of 7 contributors are vertebrates. 6 out of 7 use 4 limbs for locomotion. You get the idea. But the congruity of a creature is incredibly important when it comes to making a creature functional. Because if a hybrid has the mentality of a Scorpius Rex, it's just not going to be able to defeat the Indominus 2.0 because of split instincts. Now, with the most important part out of the way, let's talk about where the battle takes place. Isla Nublar, which the battle takes place in. It's going to be a tropical climate. And so, you might want to question yourself, can your hybrid deal with a tropical climate? Some honorable mentions were excluded for the top 16 because they had fur, which means that heat stress could be a problem, as they have more difficulty dispersing heat. Mammals might also have a problem here, because their heat regulation system is a little bit worse than reptiles. They're not going to be able to increase in size too much, and even in smaller sizes than most other gigantic stuff like sauropods and hadrosaurs, a lot of them are likely going to die of overheating, unless if their fur is completely shed. And even then, they are unable to increase their size further, and their size is a bit more limited. The second to last thing is never use AI to make a creature for you. AI can be a useful tool, but of course, you should draw and add contributors in by yourself. Or if you can't draw, ask a friend to draw for you. Going through the Hall of Shame, I noticed a lot of Hall of Shame entries just blatantly use AI to try and draw their creature, resulting in inaccurate representations, as well as just absolutely crazy and impossible looks of their hybrids, which is why you cannot rely on AI 100% of the time. Draw yourself or ask your friend to draw for you. It's that simple, really. And finally, analyze your creature yourself. Can it beat the Indominus 2.0? If you think it can, go ahead. You're good. If you can't, then recognize what's wrong and try and fix your hybrid, or just create a new one entirely. Now, going through the Hall of Shame and honorable mentions, here are some creatures that I recommend to not use, and some exotic creatures that you can use. For the ones I recommend to not use, here are a few examples. First off, don't use tardigrade. Hank used tardigrade and cooked himself with it. Hank tried to cheat death, it only made Hank's death easier. And so, please don't really use tardigrade. Second, don't use the mantis shrimp. Mantis shrimp is basically the same thing as the pistol shrimp, it's just going to destroy its own arm when out of the water. Another creature that I heavily recommend against using is the axolotl, because even if the axolotl can regenerate, it's not really going to work in a large creature when fighting against the Indominus 2.0. In fact, it would also cause metabolic issues trying to regenerate those limbs. I would put the electric eel in this category, however, it's just a matter of fact of using it right or using it wrong. The electric eel, when used for defense, is good for the creature. It's just used for defense, and it's going to be fine. If the electric eel is used for attacking, though, it's just going straight into the Hall of Shame. Now, here are some rather exotic creatures that you can use, and they will work. First off is the skunk. They have anal glands, which actually work, as it doesn't really compromise on the structure of the hybrids. As I mentioned before, the electric eel can be used, as long as it's used for defense only. But again, beware of the congruity of the creature. The stonefish, being the most venomous fish in the world, actually works. The stonefish use their spines defensively, like how the electric eel uses electricity defensively, so it could work. And finally, the blue-ringed octopus. It is said to hold 2 types of venom in its saliva, and so by meticulously adding its saliva to a hybrid, the hybrid is going to be able to have more venom potency, and it could actually work. These are just a few examples though, and I think I've ran out of things to say when it comes to how to create a hybrid to defeat the Indominus 2.0. So I think that's about it for this video. Thank you guys for watching, hope you enjoyed it, I'll see you all in the next video.